The eviction notice felt like a blade of ice in my hands, its crisp edges cutting through what should have been a joyful celebration. Just moments ago, I'd been surrounded by family in my lovingly restored Victorian home, thinking this would be my best birthday yet. I'm Leslie, a historical building restoration consultant, and this is how my 32nd birthday became the day my family chose profit over preservation. Open it, dear. Everyone's so excited to see what's inside, my mother urged, her eyes betraying an anxiety I'd later understand all too well. The envelope, wrapped in expensive silver paper with an elaborate bow, seemed innocent enough. Our living room, with its meticulously restored crown molding and original hardwood floors I'd spent the last 5 years bringing back to life, was filled with familiar faces. My cousin Evelyn perched on the antique armchair like she owned it, watching me with an expression that made my skin crawl. My brother James stood by the marble fireplace I'd uncovered and restored myself, hands shoved deep in his pockets, purposefully avoiding my gaze. "Come on, Leslie, we haven't got all day," Evelyn's voice dripped with false sweetness. I remember thinking how oddly formal she looked for a family gathering, dressed in a designer suit that seemed more appropriate for a corporate takeover than a birthday party. As I tore open the envelope, the taste of my favorite vanilla birthday cake still sweet on my tongue, 2 documents made my stomach drop: a development proposal for luxury condos and a notice of eviction, both staring back at me in bold, unforgiving letters. "What is this?" My voice barely rose above a whisper, my fingers trembling against the heavy paper. "Mom? Dad?" My mother's carefully maintained composure crumpled like tissue paper. "Sweetheart, we've been trying to find the right time to tell you." "Tell me what?" I stood up, the papers shaking in my grip. "That you're evicting me from my own home? The house I've spent years restoring? The property I've dedicated my entire career to preserving?" Evelyn cleared her throat, straightening her designer blazer. "Leslie, be reasonable. The deed is still in your parents' names, and they've decided it's time for progress. The historical preservation angle is charming, but this neighborhood is prime for development." "Progress?" I spun to face her, my voice rising with each word. "What do you know about progress? This house has stood for over a century. It's not just a property, it's living history." "I'm just trying to help the family make the best financial decision," Evelyn said, smoothing her tailored skirt with manicured hands. "The market's hot right now, and my development firm has exciting plans for this entire historic district." "Development firm?" The words felt like ash in my mouth. "This is my home, not some investment opportunity. I've spent years documenting every original feature, preserving every historical detail." James finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Les, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No." I slammed the papers down on the coffee table, an antique I'd rescued from an estate sale, making the delicate china cake plates rattle. "I want answers now. Mom? Dad? Why are you doing this?" My father wouldn't meet my eyes, fixating instead on the intricate parquet flooring I'd spent months restoring. "There have been concerns about your approach to maintaining the property. Evelyn has shown us some concerning documentation about unauthorized historical modifications." "Documentation?" The room seemed to spin, the carefully preserved Victorian wallpaper blurring at the edges. "What documentation?" "Everything I've done has been approved by the Historical Preservation Board. Every single restoration has been documented and certified. Look around you. The period-accurate crown molding, the restored original hardwood, the authenticated Victorian details, I did all of that." With questionable methods, Evelyn interjected softly, her voice carrying the false concern of a circling predator. "There are complaints from the Heritage Association, concerns about non-period appropriate materials. That's absolutely false. My voice cracked with fury and disbelief. I turned to my best friend Rachel, who stood frozen by the original bay windows I'd painstakingly restored. Rachel, tell them. You've been here through every single restoration. You've seen all the documentation. Rachel stepped forward, her face fierce with loyalty. Everything Leslie's done has been meticulously documented and approved. I've seen every permit, every certificate, every approval myself. But my family's expressions remained unchanged, as immovable as the house's foundation. My mother reached for my hand with trembling fingers. Sweetie, you have 30 days to. I jerked away from her touch, my heart pounding against my ribs. 30 days to leave my home? On my birthday? The house I've dedicated my entire career to preserving? The room started spinning, the carefully restored Victorian details blurring together. How long have you been planning this? Evelyn stood up, adjusting her expensive blazer with practiced precision. I think we should all approach this rationally. The decision's been made, Leslie. Fighting it will only complicate the development timeline. My firm has already drawn up preliminary plans for the luxury condos that will revitalize this neighborhood. Looking at her perfectly composed face, that mask of corporate concern, everything suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about the house. This was calculated, meticulously planned. The formal business attire, the mysterious documentation, the way she'd positioned herself as the voice of reason, it all made sense now. She wasn't here as family, she was here as a developer. Get out, I whispered, then louder, my voice echoing off the period-accurate wallpaper. Everyone, get out of my house. Leslie, my mother started, but they filed out one by one, leaving only Rachel behind. As the original oak door closed behind my family, I collapsed onto the antique sofa, the development proposal and eviction notice mocking me from the coffee table. Rachel sat beside me, wrapping a supportive arm around my shoulders. This isn't over, Les. Something's not right here, and we're going to figure it out. Your work on this house is documented. Your preservation efforts are recognized by the Heritage Board. I wiped my eyes, anger replacing the initial shock. You're right. Evelyn's behind this somehow. She's always seen this historic district as nothing but potential profit margins. I straightened up, new determination flooding through me. And I'm going to prove it. I'm going to protect this house and everything it represents. Looking around at my beloved home, at the walls I'd carefully restored to their original glory, the fixtures I'd authenticated and preserved, the historical legacy I'd protected, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't be the last birthday I'd celebrate here. Not if I had anything to say about it. The house had stood for over a century, and I wasn't about to let it fall to corporate greed and family betrayal. The morning after my disastrous birthday, I sat at my restored Victorian kitchen counter, staring at my phone. 17 missed calls from Mom, 5 from James, and unsurprisingly, none from Evelyn. The morning light filtered through the original stained glass windows I'd spent months restoring, casting historically accurate patterns across the period-appropriate floor tiles. You need to eat something, Rachel said, sliding a plate of toast across the antique marble countertop. She'd stayed the night, sleeping on my carefully reupholstered Victorian fainting couch like we used to do in college. You can't fight corporate development on an empty stomach. I pushed the plate away, my fingers tracing the authenticated grain patterns of the wooden counter. I can't eat. I need to figure out what kind of documentation Evelyn's been showing my parents. My hands shook as I pulled up my mother's contact information. I'm calling her, I stated, my voice firm. Put it on speaker, Rachel said, settling beside me on a restored period chair. Mom answered on the first ring. Leslie, thank goodness. We've been so worried. Save it, I cut her off, my professional composure cracking. I want to know exactly what Evelyn has been saying about my preservation work. A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. Honey, it's not just what Evelyn said. She showed us documentation of unauthorized modifications to the historical structure, complaints from the Heritage Association. That's impossible. I slammed my hand on the counter, the sound echoing off the restored tin ceiling. I have every permit, every historical board approval right here in my files. Who specifically complained? Which board member? Well, I don't have the actual complaints in front of me. Evelyn handled all of that through her development firm. Of course she did, I laughed bitterly. And did you bother to verify any of it? To check with the Historical Preservation Board before ambushing me on my birthday? Silence stretched between us, broken only by the tick of the restored Victorian wall clock. Mom? Evelyn said you'd deny everything, she finally replied, her voice small. She said you've been struggling with the preservation costs, that you've been cutting corners on historical accuracy. I want copies of everything, I demanded, my preservation consultant training kicking in. Every document, every complaint, everything Evelyn showed you. I want to see the official letterhead from the Heritage Association. Leslie, please understand. No, you understand that this house isn't just a property to be developed. It's one of the last original Victorians in this district. I've put every ounce of my expertise into its historically accurate restoration, and I'm not leaving without a fight. I hung up before she could respond. Rachel squeezed my shoulder. That's my girl. Now what's our next move? Now we gather evidence. I grabbed my laptop, opening my meticulously organized restoration documentation files. I need proof that Evelyn's lying about the preservation work. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Meet me at Carter's Coffee in 30. Need to talk. Bring your certification documents. 20 minutes later, I walked into Carter's, instantly spotting my brother in our usual corner booth. His face was drawn with guilt, his fingers nervously tapping against a thick manila envelope. You knew? I accused, sliding into the seat across from him. You knew what they were planning with the development project? James ran a hand through his hair. I found out yesterday morning. Mom and Dad swore me to secrecy, said Evelyn had proof you were compromising the historical integrity of the house. And you believed her? After seeing my preservation work firsthand? Of course not. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, something weird is going on. Last week, I overheard Evelyn on the phone talking about property values and heritage development opportunities in the neighborhood. My heart stopped. Heritage development opportunities? Yeah, and get this, her development firm, Volcrest Properties, they're the ones behind that modern complex that just demolished the old Thompson house downtown. The one the preservation community fought so hard to save. The pieces started falling into place like a grim puzzle. Our street was one of the last intact historical districts in town, with my house occupying the largest Victorian-era lot. She wants to demolish it for another modern development, I whispered. That's why she's manipulating everyone. There's more, James said, sliding the manila envelope across the table. I did some digging. Evelyn's been meeting with the City Planning Commission, and guess who else attended those meetings? Mom and Dad. He tapped the envelope meaningfully. They think they're protecting you from financial ruin, but Evelyn is playing them. She's convinced them that selling to her firm is the only way to save you from bankrupting yourself with historical preservation costs. My phone buzzed an email from Mom with attachments. I opened them, my trained eye quickly scanning the documents. These preservation complaints, the Heritage Association letterhead is wrong. The certification numbers don't match any official records. She forged them. Keep your voice down, James warned, glancing around the coffee shop. Evelyn's firm has connections everywhere in the development community. I don't care. This is proof she's fabricating preservation violations. I stood up, energized by the discovery. I need to show Mom and Dad. The Heritage Board needs to see this. Wait. James grabbed my wrist. Evelyn's big merger announcement with Volcrest Properties is in 2 weeks. Everyone will be their family, investors, the heritage community. If you're going to expose her attack on historical preservation, that's your chance to do it properly. I sank back into my seat, mind racing. 2 weeks to gather evidence proving she's trying to destroy a protected historical property for her firm's development project. I'll help, James said firmly. So will Rachel. We'll contact the Heritage Association, but we have to be strategic about this. I nodded, preservation consultant instincts taking over. Evelyn thinks she's won, that I'll abandon a century of history for her luxury condo plans. But she has no idea what I'm capable of, or how much documentation I have. Walking back to my Victorian home, I called Rachel. Remember your contact at the Heritage Association? The one who helped with my restoration certifications? We need to talk to her now. The game was on, and this time I was playing to protect more than just my home. I was fighting for the entire historical district. The preservation office smelled like old records and leather-bound books. Amanda, Rachel's contact, pulled another file from the historic registry cabinet, adding it to the growing stack on her desk. These are all the development proposals submitted for your historic district over the past 6 months, she said, keeping her voice low despite the empty office. Including 3 from Volcrest Development Group. Evelyn's firm, I muttered, flipping through the pages. My hands froze on a familiar architectural sketch. This is my house. They've already drawn up demolition plans. Rachel leaned over my shoulder. Look at the submission date. This was filed 2 months ago, before the eviction notice. Before any of this started, I said, anger building as I recognized the blatant disregard for preservation guidelines. They didn't even include a heritage impact assessment. Amanda glanced nervously at the door. There's something else. These signatures here. She pointed to the bottom of the document. Your parents' names, authorizing a preliminary structural survey. My stomach lurched. They've been planning this demolition for months. Before I could process this betrayal, footsteps echoed in the heritage-tiled hallway. Amanda quickly gathered the files, returning them to the protected archives. I've got copies at my desk, she whispered. I'll email them to you tonight, along with the proper preservation codes they're violating. We barely made it out before someone entered the office. In the parking lot, I leaned against my car, trying to steady my breathing. We need to talk to Volcrest's CEO, Rachel said. Maybe they don't know Evelyn's violating heritage protection laws. He has to know. His firm filed the demolition proposals without proper preservation assessments. My phone rang, James. Sis, you need to get to Mom and Dad's now. What's wrong? Evelyn's here with some development contractor, talking about pre-demolition assessments. They're acting like the historical property is already theirs. I was already in my car. I'm coming. Don't let them touch anything. 15 minutes later, I stormed through my parents' front door. Evelyn's voice drifted from the kitchen, smooth as polished marble. The whole historic district will benefit from modernization, property values will. Over my dead body. I announced, making them all jump. Evelyn recovered first, her corporate smile never wavering. Leslie, we were just discussing the neighborhood's future development potential. You mean your firm's future profit margin? I slapped the development proposals on the kitchen table. When were you going to tell everyone about Volcrest's demolition plans for the entire historic district? My mother's face paled. What is she talking about? Leslie's just upset about the necessary changes, Evelyn said quickly. She's too emotionally attached to outdated structures. Show them, I demanded. Show them the real reason you want my house and every other historic property on this street. The contractor cleared his throat awkwardly. I should go. Stay, Evelyn commanded. Leslie's just being dramatic, as usual. Always so emotional about these old buildings. Emotional? I laughed, my preservation consultant credentials burning in my pocket. You forged Heritage Association documents, you lied to my parents, and you're trying to demolish protected historical properties for your development project. That's enough, my father shouted. Evelyn's been nothing but helpful with the property assessment. Helpful? I grabbed the proposals, throwing them in front of him. Look at the dates. Look at the demolition plans. She's been planning to destroy this historic district for months. My mother picked up the papers, her hands trembling as she recognized the architectural drawings. These aren't the preservation documents you showed us, Evelyn. Because they're fake. Evelyn snapped, her corporate mask finally cracking. Leslie's desperate to hold on to the past. She'll say anything. I have copies from the Heritage Association. I cut in, official copies with proper preservation seals. Want to see how many regulations your development plans violate? For the first time, Evelyn's composure shattered completely. You accessed official preservation records. And I found everything, I continued, pulling out my phone to display the evidence. The forged complaints, the fake violations, the unauthorized demolition plans, it's all documented. The contractor stood up, gathering his blueprints. Miss Evelyn, if there's some kind of heritage protection issue. There's no issue, she said through gritted teeth. Everything's proceeding according to development plans. My phone buzzed an email from Amanda with the promised heritage documentation. I held up my phone triumphantly. Want to see the proof of your heritage code violations? It's right here. Evelyn's face hardened into corporate granite. You have no idea what you're doing, Leslie. No idea who you're dealing with in the development world. No, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I turned to my parents. Check your emails. I'm sending you everything, every forged document, every manipulated assessment, every secret meeting with Volcrest Development, and most importantly, every heritage protection law they're planning to violate. Evelyn, my mother's voice was small, is this true? Are you planning to demolish the entire historic district? But Evelyn was already heading for the door, the contractor trailing behind her with his demolition plans. At the threshold, she turned back, all pretense of family loyalty gone. This isn't over, Leslie. That house and this whole outdated neighborhood will be redeveloped. It's called progress. After she left, silence filled the kitchen. My father stared at the development documents, his face ashen. We should have verified the preservation records, he finally said. Should have checked with the Heritage Board. Yes, you should have. I gathered my evidence files. But now you know the truth about her development schemes. The question is, what are you going to do to help protect our neighborhood's history? I left them there, surrounded by evidence of their misplaced trust in corporate development over family heritage. In my car, I called Rachel. Phase 1 complete, I said. Now we go after Volcrest and their entire demolition plan. Finding Volcrest CEO proved easier than I expected. Richard Valentine was at his usual lunch spot, a modern cafe downtown that had once been a historic theater, with his sister, Leah. I smoothed my professional blazer and approached their table, Rachel close behind me. "Mind if we join you?" I asked, not waiting for an answer before sliding into the empty chair. Valentine's fork clattered against his modern ceramic plate. "Leslie Harding, the preservation consultant. What are you doing here?" Fascinating story. I was just at the Heritage Association, looking at some very interesting development proposals about my Victorian home and the entire historic district. Leah's eyes narrowed. "Your house? The protected Victorian property that Evelyn mentioned?" "The same one your development company plans to demolish, along with the rest of our historic neighborhood," I said, watching Valentine's face carefully. "Demolish?" Leah turned to her brother. "Richard, what is she talking about? You promised no more heritage site demolitions after the Thompson House scandal." Valentine dabbed his mouth with a napkin, all corporate polish. "This isn't the appropriate venue for discussing development plans." "It's exactly the venue," I interrupted, pulling out the demolition proposals. Volcrest filed these 2 months ago, without proper heritage impact assessments, before the eviction notice, before all of Evelyn's forged preservation violations. Leah snatched the papers, her face darkening as she read. "You're planning to demolish an entire historic district? Replace it with another soulless modern complex?" "It's a sound business decision," Valentine defended. "The neighborhood's ready for modernization. It's a protected historical district." I cut in, and Evelyn's been manipulating my family to get demolition approval. "Your parents were listed as willing sellers," Valentine said, but I caught the uncertainty in his voice. Rachel leaned forward. "They were willing because Evelyn showed them forged Heritage Association violations. She lied to everyone about the preservation status." Leah pushed her plate away, disgust evident on her face. "Is this why you're rushing the merger announcement? To push through the demolition permits before anyone can verify the heritage status?" "The timing aligns with our development schedule," he admitted stiffly. "Development schedule?" I laughed bitterly. "You're destroying a century of architectural history, demolishing preserved homes, erasing our neighborhood's heritage." "Urban renewal requires sacrifice," Valentine started, but Leah cut him off. "No, this requires deception and heritage code violations, and I won't be part of it." She stood up, gathering her things. "Count me out of the merger announcement event. I won't celebrate the destruction of protected historical properties." "Leah, wait." Valentine called after his sister, but she was already storming out. I smiled, preservation consultant mode fully engaged. "Trouble in the corporate family?" "You have no right to interfere in Volcrest's development plans," he hissed. "And you have no right to demolish protected historical properties." I stood up. "By the way, I've sent copies of everything to the Heritage Protection Board. They're very interested in Volcrest's pattern of destroying preserved sites." The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing. Try me." I dropped a business card on the table. "That's my heritage law attorney's number. Use it." Outside, Leah was waiting by my car. "I want to help protect the historic district." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I've watched Evelyn manipulate my brother for months, because I've seen how Volcrest operates." Leah's eyes flashed. "And because I have access to all their development files." Rachel grabbed my arm. "Les, this could be huge for the preservation case." "What's in it for you?" I asked Leah, my preservation instincts still wary. "Justice." and the satisfaction of stopping another historic neighborhood from being destroyed. She pulled out her phone. Starting with these emails between Evelyn and my brother, dating back 6 months, discussing how to bypass heritage protection laws. I scanned the messages, my heart racing. There it was, explicit discussion of their scheme to pressure my parents into abandoning preservation efforts, to fast-track the demolition permits, to circumvent historical protection regulations. This is exactly what we need, Rachel breathed. There's more, Leah said. Board meetings, private discussions about heritage code violations, financial arrangements with city officials. I can get you everything. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Mom and Dad want to talk. They've seen the development plans. They're ready to fight for preservation. I turned to Leah. We need to move fast. The merger announcement is in 10 days. Perfect timing for everything to fall apart, she smiled grimly. I'll send you the internal development files tonight. As Leah walked away, Rachel turned to me. Are you sure about this? Using a Volcrest insider? She's using us too, I pointed out, but right now, we both want to save this historic district. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number. The message made my blood freeze. Back off now, or you'll regret it. Some things are worth more than old houses. Rachel read over my shoulder. She's threatening you. She's desperate, I corrected, saving the message as evidence. And desperate developers make mistakes. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Rushing downstairs, I found my restored Victorian window broken, a brick lying among the shards of historic glass. A note was wrapped around it, final warning. Development proceeds. My hands shook as I called the police. While waiting, I texted Rachel and James. They arrived before the officers did. This has gone too far, James said, examining the damaged period window frame. They're destroying protected historic features, Les. I'm not backing down now. I handed the note to the police officer who was taking my statement. This is connected to a larger historical preservation case. I have documentation of the ongoing heritage violations. Just file a restraining order, the officer suggested, looking uninterested in architectural history. Not much we can do without proof of who damaged the protected property. After they left, Rachel helped me carefully secure the broken window, documenting every bit of damaged historical material. At least we have Leah's evidence about Volcrest's development plans. Those internal emails she sent last night expose everything. Speaking of which, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother. I need to go see them. They've had time to process the heritage violation evidence. I'm coming with you, James insisted. We're protecting this house as a family. 20 minutes later, we sat in our parents' living room. Mom's eyes were red from crying. We've been such fools, she whispered. All those fake preservation violations Evelyn showed us, we wanted to believe she was helping preserve the neighborhood. The development plan, Dad added, his voice heavy. We had no idea they planned to demolish the entire historic district. We thought they were just modernizing while maintaining the heritage status. Evelyn knew exactly what buttons to push, I said. She played on your concerns about preservation costs, made you think I was damaging the historical integrity of the house. She's been manipulating this whole community for years, James added. Remember when she convinced the Heritage Board to let Volcrest demolish the Thompson house? She said they'd preserve its character in the new development. Mom's face crumpled. She said your restoration work was compromising the house's historical value, that you were using non-period materials. I never did that. I swallowed hard. Every restoration I've done is documented and certified. Every material is historically accurate, every technique preservation approved. We know that now, Dad said. We've talked to everyone in the historic district. No one ever filed complaints. In fact, they all praise your preservation work. My phone buzzed. Leah, emergency. Meet at Riverside Park now. I have to go, I stood up, but first, are you with me on protecting this neighborhood? Really with me? Mom squared her shoulders. We'll do whatever it takes to save our historic district. Leah paced near the fountain, her face pale. Evelyn knows I helped you. She's threatening to reveal something about my past involvement in questionable development projects to the Heritage Board. What involvement? A mistake I made years ago with the Thompson house demolition. It could ruin my standing in preservation circles. She ran her hands through her hair. I can't risk it. I grabbed her shoulders. Whatever it is, it can't be worse than letting them destroy an entire historic neighborhood. You don't understand. My whole preservation career could fall apart. Then let it. The words came out harder than I intended. Sometimes you have to lose everything to protect what matters. Leah's eyes filled with tears. Easy for you to say. You're just fighting for one house. No, I'm fighting for every preserved building they've ever threatened, for every historic neighborhood they've destroyed, for every preservation law they've violated. I softened my tone. Including the Thompson house you regret losing. She wiped her eyes. There's something else. I overheard Richard on the phone. They're moving up the development timeline. They want to start demolition right after the merger announcement. That's in a week. Less. The announcement event is in 3 days. Leah straightened up. You're right. I can't let them destroy another historic district. Not again. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Hope you enjoyed the brick. Next time, it won't be just a window. Consider it a demolition preview. I showed Leah the message. Her face hardened. She's really losing control. Good, I said. The more desperate she gets, the more preservation laws she'll violate. The merger announcement, Leah said suddenly. All the investors will be there, the Heritage Board members, the preservation community. Perfect time to expose everything, but Evelyn will be expecting something from the preservation side. She'll be prepared. I smiled grimly. Then we'll have to be better prepared. I need every development document, every demolition plan, every heritage violation you can get. And I need them tonight. Leah nodded. I'll have them to you in 2 hours. Everything Valcrest doesn't want the Heritage Board to see. As she walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Your mom just called. Evelyn's at their house. She's crying, saying you're trying to ruin the neighborhood's future. Your parents aren't buying it, but she's putting on quite a show. I texted back, let her perform. In 3 days, she'll have a real reason to cry when the Heritage Board sees her demolition plans. The stakes were higher now, the threats more serious, but with each desperate move Evelyn made, she only proved how close we were to exposing Valcrest's violation of preservation laws. The countdown to the merger announcement had begun. The day before the announcement, I sat in my preservation attorney's office, surrounded by stacks of heritage documentation. Sarah, my lawyer, flipped through the evidence with growing interest. These emails between Evelyn and Valcrest are damning, she said, and the forged Heritage Board documents, that's criminal interference with protected properties. But is it enough? I asked, to stop the development? Absolutely. To press criminal charges? Most likely. She leaned forward. But are you sure you want to do this at the merger announcement? It's perfect timing, all the major preservation officials will be there, plus the entire development community. My phone buzzed, another threat from Evelyn, last chance to back off. Remember, I know about the Thompson House assessment. Sarah caught my expression. What's wrong? She's trying to blackmail me, I showed her the text. But the Thompson House thing? It's nothing, just a preliminary assessment I did before they demolished it. She thinks she can use it against my preservation credentials. Document everything, Sarah advised, handing me a USB drive. I've organized all the heritage violation evidence here, including the police report about the brick through your historic window. Are you sure you don't want protection? I'll be fine. James and Rachel will be with me tomorrow night. Outside the office, I found Leah waiting in her car. Get in. There's something you need to see about the development plans. She drove us to Volcrest's office building, parking in the underground garage. Richard and Evelyn are in a board meeting upstairs, but look at this. She pulled out her tablet, showing me security footage from earlier that day. Evelyn was arguing with someone in the garage, her father. Turn up the volume. I can't keep covering up heritage violations, her father was saying. The forged preservation documents, the fake assessments, it's too much risk. Daddy, please, just one more day. After the merger announcement, the demolition permits won't matter anymore. What's happening after the announcement? I asked Leah. I don't know, but they've booked a private room at the venue. Invitation only, after the main event. My phone rang. Rachel. Les, you need to get home now. Someone's been in your house. I broke every speed limit getting back. Rachel and James were waiting outside. Inside, my breath caught every preserved feature I'd restored, every historical element I'd documented, every original fixture I'd protected had been photographed and marked with bright red X's. They're documenting everything they plan to demolish, James said quietly. Rachel picked up a business card left on the counter. Look who's handling the demolition assessment. The company name made my blood boil. It belonged to Volcrest's chief contractor. How did they even get in? Your mom called, James said. Evelyn asked to borrow her spare key this morning, said she needed to measure for the merger event decorations. When Mom refused, Evelyn broke down crying, saying you were trying to ruin the neighborhood's future. Mom felt guilty and told her where she keeps the spare. I sank onto the historic staircase, looking at the red X's marking every preserved feature. This was my grandmother's house. These floors are original Victorian hardwood. That bay window has watched over this street for a century. And you're not going to lose any of it, Rachel said firmly. Tomorrow night, we end their demolition plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Leah, emergency. Development team changed the schedule. You're not invited to the private meeting anymore. Doesn't matter, I texted back. We'll expose everything during the main announcement. More preservation officials that way. I spent the rest of the day with Sarah, finalizing our heritage protection strategy. By nightfall, everything was ready. Lying in bed that night, I heard footsteps on my restored Victorian porch. Grabbing my phone to call the police, I crept to the window, but it was just my mother leaving something by the door. I opened it to find a small package with a note. Your grandmother wanted you to have this. I should have given it to you years ago. Love, Mom. Inside was my grandmother's antique locket, the one Evelyn had claimed I'd sell for restoration funds. Opening it, I found a tiny photograph of my grandmother standing proudly in front of the house the day she became its preservation steward. My phone lit up with one final threat from Evelyn. Hope you're ready for tomorrow, because Volcrest's development plans are ironclad. I touched the locket, then looked at the red X's marking my historically preserved walls. Bring it on, I whispered. Tomorrow everything would change. Either I'd save this historic district and expose Volcrest's schemes, or I'd lose everything I'd fought to preserve. But looking at my grandmother's proud smile in that old photograph, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going down without fighting for every brick, beam, and piece of heritage in this neighborhood. The merger announcement couldn't come soon enough. The merger announcement event buzzed with nervous energy. Evelyn held court at the main table, resplendent in corporate white, while Richard Valentine worked the room, charming development investors. I sat between Rachel and James, my grandmother's locket cool against my skin, the Heritage Board documentation ready. "Look who just arrived," Rachel whispered. Sarah, my preservation attorney, walked in with Leah, right on schedule. Evelyn's smile flickered for just a moment before she recovered, rising to greet them. "Leah, darling. I was worried you wouldn't show, after our disagreement about the historic district." "Wouldn't miss it," Leah said coldly, then turned to the assembled guests. "Have you met Sarah? She's fascinating, specializes in heritage protection law." The room quieted slightly. Richard appeared at Evelyn's side, his hand tight on her arm. "Perhaps we should start the development announcements," he suggested. "Wonderful idea." I stood up, raising my glass. "I'd like to go first." Evelyn's face drained of color. "That's not on the agenda." "Oh, but I insist." I moved to the center of the room. After all, what kind of preservation consultant would I be if I didn't congratulate you on your achievements in heritage destruction? The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "Leslie," my mother warned softly. "It's okay, Mom. I'm just going to share some interesting documentation with everyone." I nodded to Sarah, who began distributing folders to the Heritage Board members. "Consider it my contribution to the merger." "Security," Evelyn called out, but Leah was already blocking the door. "Let's start with these development plans," I continued, my voice carrying across the stunned room. "Detailed schemes to forge heritage documents, manipulate preservation assessments, and demolish protected historic properties for another Volcrest modern complex." Richard stepped forward. "These are private development matters." "Heritage violations are never private," Sarah interjected. "Neither is forgery of preservation documents, which brings us to Exhibit B, the falsified complaints and unauthorized assessments, complete with forged Heritage Board signatures." Evelyn's father stood up, face red. "Now wait just a minute. The Heritage Protection Board is very interested in your involvement," Sarah added smoothly. "They'll be conducting a full investigation." "You're ruining everything," Evelyn shrieked, lunging for the folders, but James was faster, already passing copies to the preservation officials. "Like you tried to ruin my historic home?" I asked. "The threats, the brick through my preserved window, the illegal property invasion?" Gasps rippled through the crowd as Rachel distributed photographs of the red X's marking my home's historic features. My phone buzzed, an email from Amanda with the official Heritage Board documentation. I held up my phone triumphantly. "Want to see the proof of every preservation law you've violated? It's all right here." Evelyn's corporate facade finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you're doing, Leslie. No idea how the development world really works. No, you have no idea what the preservation community is capable of." I turned to the assembled crowd. "Check your emails. I'm sending you everything, every forged heritage document, every manipulated assessment, every secret demolition plan, and most importantly, every preservation law Volcrest planned to violate." "Evelyn," my mother's voice was small, "is this true? Were you really planning to destroy our entire historic district?" But Evelyn was already heading for the door, Richard trailing behind her with their development plans in shambles. At the threshold, she turned back, all pretense of neighborhood improvement gone. This isn't over, Leslie. That outdated neighborhood will be redeveloped. It's called progress. After she left, silence filled the room. The Heritage Board members were huddled over the evidence, their faces grave. My father stared at the development documents, his face ashen. "We should have verified with the Preservation Office," he finally said. "Should have trusted your expertise." "Yes, you should have. I gathered the heritage violation evidence. But now you know the truth about their demolition schemes. The question is, what are you going to do to help protect our neighborhood's history?" I left them there, surrounded by proof of their misplaced trust in corporate development over historical preservation. In my car, I called Rachel. "Phase 1 complete," I said. "Now we ensure the Heritage Board acts on these violations." Looking at my grandmother's locket, I smiled. The house had stood for over a century, and thanks to proper preservation laws and documentation, it would stand for centuries more. Some things are worth more than progress, they're worth protecting.